Dr. Plescia. Now you may think he's the only doctor, and it's not true. I go to the Mayo Clinic once a year, and they have good doctors, as you might imagine, but this guy's my favorite one. And he's going to talk to us about what it takes to be in good health.
Thanks, Rob. That's being compared to Mayo Clinic. That's wow. I appreciate that. And I would put in a plug for that book or other books like it, so that you can get your wishes known, so that your wishes get followed even after you can no longer explain those wishes to your loved ones. Having those discussions is a great idea. So I see a lot of familiar faces in the group, but for those that I don't know, I'm John Plescia. Like Rob said, I'm a family doctor at the Oregon Clinic, and I also see patients at Pinecrest and Serenity Hospice. You'll hear more about Serenity from Rob G. a little bit later in the program. Thanks, Rob, for the invite, and thanks, Pastor Josh, for hosting. This is a nice, intimate venue here, so feel free to stop me with any questions as we go along. There was once a 104-year-old woman who was being interviewed, and the reporter asked her, "So what's your favorite thing about being 104? And she said, "No peer pressure." Hi. Here's one of our favorite nurses in the community.
You're too kind.
So I do think age is very relative. You know, this whole discussion today is about later in life issues. And that 104-year-old woman would look at an 80-year-old and say, wow, they are young. They have so much life ahead of them. And that 80-year-old would look at a 60-year-old and be like, wow, they are so fit and strong. And the 60-year-old would look at the 40-year-old, and you know, on and on. Our high schoolers, I'm 43, our high schoolers and their friends look at me and my wife and they're like, geez, they're the old people, you know? And the middle schoolers look at the high schoolers and like, wow, look at those big kids, they're driving, you know? It's all so relative. So I don't think you can look at an age and a number and say too much about that. You know, there is such a thing as the lifespan, and really life expectancy in this country is still right about 80. And that really hasn't changed a whole lot lately. A lot of that has to do with infant mortality and younger deaths. You know, if people are dying in their 20s and 30s from drug overdoses or infectious disease, or SIDS, let's say, for newborns, that's going to pull the life expectancy average way down. But still right around 80 is where we're at. A little bit higher for women, a little bit younger for men. We say that's testosterone-induced stupidity that leads to some of those earlier deaths. So there's lifespan, but there's also health span. And that's staying healthier longer, staying more active, staying functional, and feeling well, you know. Modern medicine can get people to live longer, but, you know, let's say somebody lives to 95, 96, how are their last 10 years? Were those last 10 years enjoyable? Would those people say that it was worthwhile to get those extra 10 years? You know, it's kind of like however long you're going to live, you want it to be enjoyable. So those are the things, you know, as we try to stay in good health that we're looking for, making those years quality. And a lot of people would ask, you know, is it as simple as eating well, exercising, not smoking, not drinking to excess, and managing stress? And I would say, yes, it is that simple. It's so simple to say that, but to actually do that is very difficult. And you have to do all those things, not just once or twice for a day or a week. You have to do them consistently long term to maintain good health. So those will kind of be the topics that we talk about today: the eating right, the exercise, not smoking, not drinking to excess, and managing stress. You could easily spend an hour talking on each one of those, but I'll just hit on them very briefly. There's so many fad diets out there. You know, you're always hearing about, you know, the low carb diet, the this, that. I think it should be much more simple than specific diets, and people get burned out on those diets. You know, let's say the low carb diet, for example, it will work. You know, you will lose weight if you completely cut out carbs, but you're going to be losing a lot of enjoyment too in eating some carbs, and there are some healthy carbs out there too. And so many people start on that diet and then fall off of it, and their weight goes right back up. So I think a couple things with diet, it's got to be more of just a day-to-day routine, not a specific diet. I like to say heavy on the fruits and vegetables. Kind of the Mediterranean diet, you know, if you're going to pick one, that is a good one that's very well balanced. Heavy on the fruits and vegetables, really about 3 fruits and 3 vegetables each day. And that's a lot. I mean, it takes effort to get that many fruits and vegetables. Preferably fresh, but if you can't get fresh, frozen is better than canned. Canned just has so much salt in it, and a lot of the nutrients are baked and boiled out of that. Freezing at least maintains a lot of those good nutrients. I think growing a garden is excellent because you're going to be not only active, being out there growing it, but then you can eat it so incredibly fresh. I think it's hard to beat a fresh tomato, you know, just that flavor is just right there. But if not, growing it yourself, farmers markets. Amazing farmers markets all around the Sauk Valley. I mean, and then you're supporting local farmers too, which is cool. I say kind of light on the meats, especially the red meats. Some chicken and fish, definitely a good idea. And kind of the idea is less processed, the better. You know, eat a chicken breast that's grilled rather than chicken tenders, rather than chicken McNuggets. You know, the more processed you get, the worse. There's so many additives there. Less packaged foods. You know, don't do your grocery shopping at the gas station or Dollar General, really. Go someplace where you can see real food that's not packaged. Beverages, soda is really a bad idea. A lot of people say, well, is diet better? It probably is maybe a touch better just because there are not so many calories, but I would say moderation on the diet soda as well. If you really enjoy one Diet Coke every day, fine. You know, it's not going to hurt you, but don't have 5 of them. You know, 12 ounces of diet soda, a little caffeine boost, that's fine. I think another takeaway is to just not make it so rigid that you're worried about what you're eating all the time. You don't want to be stressed. Food should be enjoyable. So moderation, you know, if you're going to kind of splurge and have some pie and cake on Thanksgiving, great. You could probably do that once a month, you know, but not once a day. So a little moderation. People ask about coffee and caffeine. 1 or 2 cups a day, that's fine. 1 or 2 pots a day, that's too much. You know, moderation. Any questions at this point? And we'll have a little time for questions at the end too, but feel free to ask if they come up. So that's kind of eating right. I also say heavy on the nuts, seeds, whole grains, fiber, all just very healthy. Avocados, chestnuts, almonds, pistachios, sunflower seeds. Some people cringe at the idea of salads, but you can make a good salad that tastes good and will fill you up a little bit. If you put sunflower seeds and craisins and grilled chicken, I mean, that can be a really tasty, good salad. So get creative. There's so many websites and cookbooks out there, and it takes time, to prepare these meals. I think it's worth the effort, though. Then we go to exercise. Americans are so sedentary nowadays. We've gotten away from the agrarian society where everybody was farming and working physically hard. We spend too much time in front of screens, and that's for kids as well as aging adults. Do you spend 2 hours a day in front of a TV or a computer? That's time you could have been exercising. I have so many patients that say, I just don't have time for that. Well, you probably do, actually. I mean, you've got to look at where you're spending your time. What do you value? If you value good health, you'll make time for a little exercise. I'm a big fan of walking. I think it's pretty low impact. Most people can do it regardless of age. And it burns calories and it gets your heart rate up. I think walking outside is great because you're then getting the fresh air and nature exposure as well. But when the weather's terrible, you may have to go indoors. Let's say you've got really bad hips and knees and walking is just too painful. I say get in a pool and walk in the pool, or swim. It's just so low impact, but you'll still be burning the calories. I love seeing my patients at NASH. It's just, that shows they're doing something, they're moving. A lot of patients ask, well, how much time needs to be spent? And that kind of depends on the intensity of the workout that you're doing. Kind of the recommendation is 4 to 5 times per week of a half hour of moderate to intense exercise. You could cut that down to 3 to 4 times per week if it's 45 minutes of high intensity exercise. Walking at a rapid pace is kind of moderate intensity. Jogging would be high intensity. I recommend the elliptical machines also if you have bad joints. That can be a little bit easier on the joints and still get the heart rate up. Kind of the goal for heart rate is 220 minus your age. That's the max heart rate that you should be going for. And try to get about 80% of that max for that half hour workout. So that's a little bit of a goal there. I would say don't be too hung up on the weight, on your own weight. Go for more health. How do you feel? And how functional are you? What are the things you want to be doing? Going up steps, getting in and out of vehicles, carrying groceries, carrying grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Can you do those things that you want to do? If you can and you feel decent, that's a sign of good health. Not smoking. I mean, that's pretty obvious. We all know smoking's terrible for your health. And it's not just smoking, it's any nicotine. Don't chew tobacco. A lot of people think, oh, well, it's not so bad, I'm not breathing in smoke. Any nicotine is a vasoconstrictor, and it's going to constrict blood vessels across your entire body. So it's going to affect your heart, it's going to affect your kidneys, it's going to affect your eyes. Guys struggle with erectile dysfunction. Well, if you're smoking a pack a day, that nicotine is constricting blood vessels, and all an erection is more blood flow. So think about that. We see the teenagers now with the vaping, and it's an epidemic. I mean, in the middle school and the high school, so many kids are vaping, and it's the next wave of catastrophe. Honestly, we've gotten away from the cigarettes over the past few decades. Now we're into the vaping, and the kids are just as addicted to nicotine. I've seen kids with migraine headaches, not sleeping well, problems focusing, and turns out they're hitting that vape all the time. So that's one thing to maintaining good health, avoiding nicotine. Alcohol. It's kind of seesawed in the recommendations. You know, for a while they were kind of saying, well, have a glass of wine for good health, have a beer or two for good health. Now we're kind of getting away from that. The recommendation now is don't drink on purpose for good health. You know, don't go out of your way to have that glass of wine every single night thinking that that's a healthy thing to do. If you really enjoy a glass of wine, great, have it. You know, if you want one beer a night, great, have it. Don't have 5. And probably don't have that one glass of wine or beer or two every single night. Maybe a couple nights out of the week. And it's all risk reward, you know, how much do you enjoy it versus what is the risk? You know, they're kind of saying there is a link between cancer and alcohol. So, you know, think about it, but don't beat yourself up if you're having a glass of wine here and there. Managing stress. That's an issue across the age spectrum, I would say. The stresses probably change as we age, but how do you manage that? Yoga, guided meditation, spirituality, nature, communion with groups of people that you enjoy being with, family, friends, groups like this. The exercise and the eating well is going to help manage the stress also. All these things kind of feed off of each other. As you're doing one or more of these healthy activities, you're going to feel better and it's going to make the other things easier. I think everybody should have a counselor of one kind or another. I think it's a lot like physical therapy or exercise. You know, for your physical body, you need mental and emotional well-being as well. That human connection with another person of counseling is really beneficial. A lot of people say, well, I don't need a counselor. I talk to my spouse or I talk to my neighbor. And that's all good, but counselors are trained specifically for this. And they're objective because they don't know you on a friend level or a family level. So I think they can be more helpful in that way. So basically, like I said, it is very simple. Good health should be simple, but it's very difficult to do these things, and you've got to get in a routine of doing them most days out of the week. Especially it's difficult with society kind of pushing us in the opposite direction. You know, every time you go in a gas station or watch TV commercials, it's pushing all of these prepackaged junk foods. And, you know, everybody seems to be so rushed a lot of times that families are going to the easier foods. And life is getting so hectic for so many people, stress levels go up, time for exercise goes down. So it's like you kind of have to buck the trends and make this a priority if you want to have good health. Aside from these healthy lifestyle choices, you know, the medical community does have things to offer for good health. I'd say, you know, doctors and nurse practitioners maybe contribute 10% to good health. All the other things we talked about is probably 50% of good health, and the other 40% is genetics. I was talking with Rob earlier, you know, athletes, you've got to have some genetics for it. Otherwise, especially elite athletes, or you're just not going to make it. you could do all these things that I just talked about exactly right and still have a terrible event, a motor vehicle accident, a terrible fall, some unforeseen cancer, you know, so life is fragile. You could do all these things right and still have something bad happen, but you're improving your likelihood of living long and living healthy if you do these things. The things that the medical community really can provide that are the most bang for your buck, I would say, are vaccines. You know, for the older crowd, shingles vaccine, tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis booster, pneumonia vaccines. One of the newer ones is RSV. I think is worthwhile getting. COVID boosters every year, worth getting. Flu shot every year, definitely worth getting. And then cancer screening tests. For women, that's breast cancer, cervical cancer, and for men, colon cancer and prostate cancer. Colon for both men and women, obviously. And mammogram for women, very important. After age 75, you no longer need those if you've had normal ones leading up until that. And then DEXA scan, especially for women, but also for men over age 70, getting one DEXA scan, that's a bone density scan, looking for osteoporosis, is worthwhile. Let's say you have really poor bone density, there are medications that can help that, but all the lifestyle things also help. Not smoking, not drinking to excess, and exercising all improve bone density. Yes, Jan?
How about measles vax for adults now?
Yes. They're saying if you live in an area where there's an endemic going on, it's worth getting that booster.
Because I have no idea if we've had it as a child.
Right. That's a good question.
What was her question?
Should
Measles.
folks get the
Measles
measles vaccine later in life? What you can do is get a titer.
I could ask my mom, she'd remember.
Yeah, she may remember too.
I just
Right.
thought of that.
Yeah.
She'd know.
I mean, yeah, it's a good point. And I
Because I
don't,
heard 4 cases in Illinois.
yeah,
Heard that
I heard
this
that
morning.
too. Not right around here. We've had pertussis here.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know the exact recommendation right now, but watch for it over the coming months to see. The CDC website is really good information. You can just Google that and see what's recommended. In closing, I would say stick with it. It can, you know, be frustrating sometimes. You feel tired, but getting up, getting out there and exercising afterwards, you're probably going to have more energy. So, worth doing it. And just by being here and hearing these talks, it shows that you have an interest and a desire to stay healthy. So, thank you much. Yes, Rob.
Question, or thought question for you. You alluded to screens and the young folks and vaping. I just concluded a book called The Anxious Generation. It's very well done, it's very well footnoted. The basic premise seems to be that about the time that smartphones came into existence, young people's mental health began to tank.
Yes. I think
So-
that's completely accurate. Yeah.
Do you see any, what's the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess is my question.
Yes. The light at the end of the tunnel is parents being parents and limiting that screen time and the smartphone time.
It's very interesting, that answer coincides with the prescription. The author, he had it broken down by age, so 0 to 6 something, 6 to 10 something different. Over time there was more leniency in allowing the children to have more sophisticated equipment and screen time.
I think that's fair. I think that's reasonable. They're going to be on the screen a lot at school as it is. I think there's just so many unhealthy interactions with Snapchat and Facebook and all of this. Parents have to try to limit it, and that's easier said than done too. I mean, we have 4 teenagers and it is not easy. But as a parent, you could say, I'm gonna take your phone for the next 6 hours. All the phones have to come out of the bedrooms at night. I think that is very reasonable. You don't need your kids getting woken up by messages in the middle of the night. You know, that is another healthy habit that I wanted to mention is good sleep. So important, especially in the aging population. Everybody's worried about dementia and memory loss. Heart health is brain health, and part of that is getting good sleep. No screen time within 2 hours of going to bed for any age is recommended. If you have sleep apnea, getting it treated is a healthy thing to do. Keep that brain oxygenated.
One of the corollaries that this author came up with was, as you just suggested, limiting the screen time, but getting the children outside to play.
Absolutely.
Get rid of the screens and don't organize their play. Let them choose up sides and play hide and go seek or pick up baseball or whatever.
Yeah.
But get them out in nature, socializing with their friends.
It's huge. I mean, the brain is developing at these young ages. Making eye contact is good for the brain. And if kids are just constantly looking at their phone, they're losing that. Anxiety and depression are huge in the adolescent population. I think getting them to counselors, getting them outside, it can be, the damage that's been done by the technology, I think can be reversed, but it's going to be very difficult. And that generation, you know, even people in their early 20s that had COVID for those 3 or 4 years during their college or high school years, that was such a strain on them. I think, you know, every generation has to be a little bit gentle to the others, you know. Plenty of people bash the boomers, you know, and then the boomers bash the Gen X and the Gen Z, you know. Every generation has had its difficulties and its positives, you know. I think if we be sensitive to each other, that can help too. Having a mentor, you know, if you find some teenager, early 20s, and kind of take them under your wing, and they're receptive to that, that could be huge for you and them. It keeps your brain young and functioning and getting in tune with newer ideas, and it shows them, hey, I've got somebody that actually cares about me, and they're teaching me how to make eye contact and work hard, and, you know. What was the other part of your question?
I think you answered them.
Okay.
And what was the name of the book?
The Anxious Generation. I can't remember the first name of the author. The last name was Haight.
Cool. So I'm gonna read that. Thanks, everybody. Stay healthy. I'm gonna go and try to be a good parent and spend time with my kids.
Thank you. Thank you very much.